Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu, he's Stefan Bienkowski. This is, I think, the final show of this year, unless we do a bonus show during the Christmas period. See how it goes. It is definitely the final match day of the year, 2025, match day 15, done and dusted. Not quite the end of the first half of the season, with two more games for that. But Stefan, I've never been more ready for a Christmas break than this one in my entire life. How about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I know within a week I'll be desperate for it to return. Get to like next Saturday and it'll be that kind of period between Christmas and New Year's where you don't know what day it is, you don't know what time it is. You're looking for some sort of consistency in your life again after drinking for like 3 or 4 days straight
Yeah.
and being full of food. And sometimes a bit of football does help with that. But yeah, it's. I think it's come at a good break. I think the Bundesliga made that perfectly clear this weekend. Actually, we were discussing this. How many nil-nil draws were there? Like three, four. Um, it completely ruined my betting coupon. That's for sure. Because usually the Bundesliga is pretty solid for 2.5 goals a game if both teams score, something like that. And then
Yeah.
it felt like everyone had already shut up shop for Christmas, with some exceptions, which we'll talk about today. But yeah, it feels like a very
Mm.
fitting end to the year, Manu, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. All the goals seem to have happened at
Yeah.
Wolfsburg Freiburg. And I want to highlight that one real quick because Pesinovic, the young striker, the youngest player to score a hat trick in the Bundesliga since a certain
Mm,
Thomas Müller did it. Um, 17 years ago
yeah.
now, so it feels like a
And
long time.
back-to-back games for Christian
Um,
Eriksen assist, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it wasn't enough. You still lost, so it could be
Yeah.
a better story, I guess. But I was joking about that in our Gegenpressing WhatsApp chat. Is like everyone is ready for holidays. And the thing is, like the players get some time off. I can guarantee you there was a few of them that went straight from. They didn't probably even go to the team bus. They like straight jumped into whatever car they had ready waiting outside the stadium to go to the airport and just fly wherever it's warm right now because that's I think what a lot of them are doing this time of the year. They're just heading to whichever Christmas location they can hit, Mallorca, Dubai, you name it. They're probably there right
Yeah,
now.
I mean, I think obviously a lot of players play in different leagues and stuff, and I think they probably appreciate the kind of freedom they do get in the Bundesliga. Because I was watching an interview or the press
Yeah.
conference with Pep Guardiola today, and he was talking about how his players play on Boxing Day at Nottingham Forest. I think it's Boxing Day, which is the day after Christmas. I think it's got different names in different parts of the world. Um, and he was, yeah, the day after
26th, right?
Christmas. And
Yeah.
he was saying that actually maybe it isn't. I'm just double checking now. It's sorry, the Saturday they'll be playing. So Christmas is Thursday, one day off, and then they play on the Saturday. And he was saying that all his players at Man City will be weighed before Christmas and then weighed after Christmas. And if they've put on too much weight, they don't get to play in the game on Saturday. So uh, compare that to like Nico Schlotterbeck probably sitting on a sunbed in Malaga or something like that, or Mallorca, wherever, with about 100 other Germans. It's very different scenarios. So, you can say we want about the Bundesliga, but it's got a very healthy life work balance, I would say.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's great. The two leagues that I cover the most, both MLS and Bundesliga are off, so I'm having a great time. And of course, Stefan,
Yeah.
Christmas for you, right? It's the second Christmas day, the 26th. If you are German, Christmas is
Yeah.
associated with
Can I
Christmas
can, can I
Eve.
can I also add,
Um,
the players get a Christmas break, but so do sports journalists, which is an important thing to note in because I remember when I moved back to the UK after working in
yeah,
Germany, covering German football. When I was out in Germany, I'm like, great, I can go home for Christmas. I can turn off for a couple of weeks. And then I come back to live in
mm,
the UK. I end up working for BBC Scotland and I'm covering the Scottish Premiership for them, which means I need to be up on Boxing Day, crack of dawn because the full fixture list. And if anyone who's followed me on Twitter back in the day will know that every single year I used to complain about football on Boxing Day, and I was like, it should be against human rights that these people have to play. these poor footballers can't even enjoy their Christmas, and obviously I was just talking about myself. Because football fans in the UK typically love going to Boxing Day games because it's something they can do with their family when
Yeah.
everyone's got time off and stuff. And I don't understand that. But for sports journalists coming back from having that time off in Germany, I was distraught. So yeah,
I have this theory too, and I think we need to enjoy it because I do sense that there will be a time soon when there will be Bundesliga football over the Christmas breaks. Probably not on Boxing Day or on Christmas Day, but I do sense that as the winter break is getting shorter and shorter because now they're coming back January 9th. I remember when they wouldn't come back until February and play indoor, right? Like they would proper take off a good 4 or 5 weeks. Um, so, as the break is getting shorter, I think there might be a time soon when we will actually see games played in late December. Because, it is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking as the calendar becomes more and more stuffed with more and more competitions. I could see a day where that happens, but that's my theory. I'm not a darts guy at all, but a lot of Germans are, and I think the reason why darts is so popular in Germany and is I think the only other country than the UK where it's extremely popular is because there's no
yeah.
Bundesliga
I
football
think it's
that
really
time of year.
popular in the Netherlands as well. I mean, I hate darts. I don't hate it. That's a strong
Yeah,
word, but I don't really see the appeal of it. But whenever I go to the pub and
no,
it's on,
me
there's always
neither.
some like big bald Dutch guy winning it comfortably. So yeah,
Yeah.
it feels like a very Dutch sport. They're so tall; they'd be really good at it.
I used to play for a club called Ali Pali in London, so that's as close to darts as I get.
Another hidden story about Manu's past.
It's a beautiful part of London. All right, well let's kick it off with the Bundesliga stuff. Friday, the derby between the two Borussias. And people always ask, and if you haven't heard me say that before, Borussia is just the Latin name for Prussians. So if you wonder what the name Borussia actually means and why there is so many Borussias in that part of Germany is because, it was part of the Prussian Empire before Germany became one country. And Borussia is just the name for Prussia in Latin. So there you have it. So if your club is named Borussia Dortmund, you're essentially just a Bayern Munich from a different part of the country. So this is the derby of the big Borussias. There's of course lots of other Borussias as well, dotted all over that part of Germany. And of course Preußen Münster as well, which just took the German name. But this derby, it ended 2-0 for Borussia Dortmund, a late Maxi Bayer goal. But it was a lot closer than I think Borussia Dortmund wanted it to be. And it really speaks for the work that Eugen Polanski has been doing at Gladbach, getting them out of the basement of the table. They're now comfortable mid-table, I think, which is what they would have totally taken a few weeks ago. But it also, Dortmund comfortably in second place, 9 point gap to Bayern Munich. And there's been so much talk about the dressing room with Schlotterbeck and Kovac and now Adeyemi in the bust up, where he wanted to go straight to the dressing room when he was brought off in the 60th minute. And I think we can talk about the Adeyemi stuff in a moment. And I think we also have to highlight that the results wise, this isn't as terrible as it maybe feels for Dortmund fans. Bayern Munich have been playing a fantastic first 15 games of the season, and we get to talk about them in a moment too. But despite all of that, despite the good results in the Champions League, despite the fact that in the Bundesliga, there's a few results that they probably want to have back, it's not actually that bad. It feels like a crisis at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we'll come on to talk about Leverkusen and Leipzig later in the show, and I think the comparisons between them and Dortmund's really interesting right now. And I've actually wrote my newsletter this week on Leverkusen. I won't give it away, but I do draw a lot of comparisons to Dortmund in it. And I think if you're a Dortmund fan, you can probably look at that league table, take a deep breath, and just think, I'm going to go enjoy my Christmas. I'm going to stop thinking about football for a couple of weeks and we'll see what happens in January because they did. It feels like they've kind of limped over the line here, doesn't it? They've got over the finish line. They've sprained their ankle. They've dislocated their knee. I don't know. They've done something. They're really struggling at the end of the finish line, but they got there in the end to an extent. And even this game alone, I mean, I know Gladbach were, I thought, quite solid. They looked far better than they have done, obviously, at the start of the season because they were quite competitive. Dortmund obviously had plenty of chances to score. You know, Girassi had a goal ruled offside. Maximilian Bayer missed a one-on-one, which he seems to be doing at least once a week at this moment in time, which is a concern for me. But for the most part, I mean, and there's also like half chances, like Adeyemi like intercepted one kind of pass across the goal and it almost went in and things like that. So it was a lively and spirited performance from Dortmund, but I do think it kind of maybe showcased a team that were a little tired, a little jaded, maybe a side that have had to deal with a lot of criticism in and outside the club, perhaps, or in and outside the stadium, if you will. There's a lot of noise around a lot of the players right now. Niko Kovac is dealing with some pressure as well on his job. And not to mention the kind of wider, how do we put it? The kind of, I guess, I don't want to keep using the word criticism, but I guess wider kind of criticism of the board itself. And, we've obviously talked about that around the AGM time and how Vatska perhaps isn't the undisputed voice of leadership and reason that he once was at Dortmund. And I do think they'll probably have to look at the January transfer window, or at least they should look at the January transfer window and probably think the two teams that are breathing down our neck in Leipzig and Leverkusen have a lot more strength and depth in a lot of areas. Leipzig don't have the Champions League to contend with. And Leverkusen are certainly in the ascendancy since since Hjulman came in. So I think this result itself was a solid one, but again, also one you would expect them to win. It's at home where they are usually typically solid. They've got a pretty decent record against Gladbach. In fact, it's a very good record if I'm not mistaken. And, for all of Gladbach's improvements in recent weeks, they're still a team that are like mid-table at best. They still got decent players in there. I thought Gio Reyna looked quite good at times. Rocco Reitz looked decent at times. But I think it was just getting over the line. That's all that really mattered to you. Getting the 3 points, get to the winter break, and we'll kind of just make base camp here and try and regather our thoughts and our emotions and our energy, and then tackle the second half of the season when it comes. Really,
Yeah, I mean, emotions is probably the good point to move on to Adeyemi. Yeah.
should we explain what happened for people who maybe didn't see what happened?
Yeah, we should. I mean, it's 60th minute. He comes off for Maxi Bayer, right? And throws a temper tantrum on the bench, and essentially wants to walk off to the dressing room. Sebastian Kehl, his role is the sporting
Well,
director at the moment,
in his
right?
role there was like a linebacker. He basically intercepted him, kind
Yeah.
of pinned him down.
He's basically, made it clear to Karim Adeyemi in no small terms that he is not going to go off to the dressing room and do his own thing. And then, of course, the club came out afterwards very strongly and said that Adeyemi would receive a fine, that he's going to be reminded of the values of the club. I haven't 100% checked what the fine was, but this I think this is just another escalation of the things that are happening between Borussia Dortmund and Adeyemi, and also Adeyemi, of course, whose personal life is very public because he's together with Loredana Safi, an Albanian Swiss rapper, right? She's born from the Kosovo. She's quite a bit older than him. They've been married since 2024. I think she played a really big role in the fact that the whole scandal where weapons were found in his possessions, and they were fined 60 daily payments of 7,500 euros. And to remind people too, in Germany, all fines are often based on how much money you make, so they can be quite high. And I think because of that, he gives himself a platform to be attacked. by the public. Bild wrote a very nasty article that I think borders on racism. Today, I believe it came out. We're using the kind of rapper language to make Adeyemi look like someone
Mm.
he's not, I think. But I think on the other side of that is that he is a player who we all know has an enormous amount of talent. We all feel like a lot of the talent is being wasted or not always being put forward. Kovac is
Mm.
very hard on him, I think, which is something that he is struggling with. I think part of the reason why Adeyemi was brought off after 60 minutes is because he didn't play to the level that Kovac requires of him, or puts in the shift or the work shift that Kovac requires of him. And Kovac isn't exactly someone who's not familiar with the world that Adeyemi lives in. He himself is born and raised in Berlin. Grew up in a circle that is very similar to the sort of circle that Adeyemi lives in. The players crossing with popular culture, music kind of thing. So it's not like Kovac doesn't understand that aspect, right? And it's probably also why he's so harsh on Adeyemi. But I feel like we're getting into a stage now where the escalation between the two sides. And remember, I think it was last summer where he almost went off to Napoli. And it's getting to the point now where you almost wonder, is Adeyemi maybe off this January? We put out a social media post on Transfermarkt today where you saw players that were out of contract as of June
Mm.
2027, right, Stefan? And he was on it together with Schlotterbeck, who's also been critical. So I think that is the one. The Adeyemi one is the one that is so very public, and it's starting to become a public conflict. And because of his background and where he's from, I think offers a bigger platform for especially tabloid papers, which is I personally think is not fair. But it's the world that we unfortunately live in. But at the same time, it also highlights that not everything is well between the players, the coaches, the club. It's not. There's no harmony at the moment, and that can be sometimes a good thing too. Like you look at Bayern Munich. This is a club that uses conflict or has used conflict in the past to get the best out of players, but has also realized that they need to tone it down a little bit, which is, I think, why they're so successful at the moment. But this is the stuff that's going on at the right now, and I do sense that it's maybe this Christmas break will be perfect. Everyone can just go away for a couple of weeks and let it cool down. But you do get the sense that this is something the club has to get a handle of very quickly.
Yeah, Adeyemi is such an interesting one. I think there's kind of two things happening here at once. As you said, there's these kind of really unfair personal attacks he's getting from the media, sections in the
Mm.
media who make a lot of money and get a lot of attention for making these kind of personal attacks on all sorts of German players. So that's not unfortunately surprising, even if it is unfair. Um, and there's also the aspect of him as a player, and I think the two are obviously intertwined. But I think unfortunately one leads into the other in the sense that if Adeyemi was scoring goals and creating chances and being the key man for Dortmund, I don't really think Bild reporters would be writing hit pieces about him. Now that's not to say he deserves it because he's playing poorly. Not anything like that nothing like that at all. But it's the kind of
Mm.
duality of Adeyemi in the sense that he's a player who is immensely talented, got immense promise because of the attributes that he has, but has always, in my opinion, struggled for consistency. And I think the problem that he has
Mm.
always had at Dortmund is that he's never been able to nail down that consistency. Now, Niko Kovac is his third coach at Dortmund, and first he had Terzic, then Nuri Sahin, and now Niko Kovac. And all three of those head coaches are very, very different men. They have very different methods, and they've all played Adeyemi in very different roles. And the guy's only 23 years old. He's gone through a lot at Dortmund despite being such a young man. And I think how I kind of look at Adeyemi is that, and we were actually chatting about this in the group chat during the Dortmund game as I was watching it, and I think he's obviously got a huge bit of talent, but I also think he's one of those players that really has to work off instinct. I remember writing a piece back when he was working under, I think, Terzic at its time at Dortmund, and he was in and out of the team. He was, there was a whole lot of talk about him playing for the under-21s for Germany to kind of get game time. Kovac was playing him as a wing back, if at all. And there's a lot of discussion as to what his role should be. And I remember I looked back at his time before Dortmund and looked at the stats, and the numbers tell you that he is better in the box as a penalty box striker when he's reacting in real time to, plays, exploiting space, reacting to the ball to feet, things like that. He's a penalty box striker. He's a poacher. But because he's so fast, because he's good at dribbling with the ball, every single head coach instinctively thinks, wow, this guy would be a great winger. This guy would be a great inside forward. This guy would be a great second striker. And what you end up getting is Adeyemi running around the pitch, doing what he can, but very rarely actually being inside the box. And as a result, I think that's largely one of the reasons why I think maybe he does struggle for form. He doesn't really get to play in his key position, in my opinion. He doesn't get to be the penalty box striker that I think he was before he joined Dortmund. And he certainly does a job for Dortmund. He has, he's had perfectly good games as wingers and as an inside forward and things like that. But I don't think he gets the best out of him. And I think that's why we do see him have these very inconsistent runs. Even like this season alone, he had that run where he had like 1 assist and 2 goals in the start of the season, like in 3 games. And then a few weeks ago, he had goals back to back, and then a couple in the Champions League. And it feels like every time he's like just kind of settling into a groove, things kind of come undone for him. And I think that is because he's a player who's having to kind of really fit into that Dortmund team where he's needed, really, unfortunately. If it was up to me, if I was a Dortmund head coach, I'd probably be try to play him up front. The fact that, okay, Guirassy looked better in the last kind of couple of weeks, perhaps, but when Guirassy was going through a really rough form, I would have just stuck Adeyemi up front, said sit in the box, cause havoc, play off the last man, and see how you do, because that's where I think his best position is. But I don't know, man. We'll need to kind of see where this takes him, because, as you mentioned there, he will be entering his final year of his contract in 2026, in the summer of 2026, not the end of the season. And if he's not really prepared to sign a new contract with Dortmund, they'll have to maybe decide what they want to do. And honestly, if I were Dortmund, I probably would sell him. I'd sell him for the right price. And just kind of cut my losses and kind of get on with him. He reminds me of so much of Daniel Malen, who's also another extremely talented player, but perhaps a little too talented in the sense that he ends up being a kind of jack of all trades but master of none. At least he did at Dortmund, and I think Adeyemi's kind of fallen into the same kind of bracket, unfortunately. And that means he's not consistent. That means he gets criticism, and unfortunately, it means he gets these hit pieces from the German media.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think, I think what is at play here too, it is not just him. We had this chat a little bit about him getting these hit pieces by the German media, and that white players not necessarily would get it the same way. And that there is truth to this. I'm not going to deny that. But I think what's really fascinating about him is, Loredana, his wife, is a very successful person, maybe even as successful, more successful than he is. And there's a little bit of a narrative here too. He's been represented by Gesti Food, and it's a very powerful Jorge Mendes' agency, and she plays a big role in that part of his life. And the German media has a very big problem with people, with powerful women. I remember, going back a little bit, Bianca Ilgner, who was Bodo Ilgner's agent and wife, was often a hit target until the family moved to Real Madrid. Angela Hessler, Ike Hessler's wife, is another one. More recent example is Wanda, right, with Mauro Icardi. That's the kind of like this power couple kind of families that this reminds me of. But with that in mind, with her having such a big say in his career and being so successful herself, and of course now the media going after him, and on top of that, I just looked at the Transfermarkt and looking at the clubs that are linked to him, throw in the agency, as Barcelona's in there, Arsenal, Man United. If there is a strong market, I think Napoli were the club that were really interested in him. in the summer. I'm pretty sure, you know, when they make a decision together, and it sounds like the two of them make a lot of the decisions together with Jorge Mendes, who's extremely successful in moving players to the clubs that suit them best. I think Dortmund will look at these hit pieces by the media and say, "Well, thank you. this this is not necessarily what we wanted." And I think you raise another really important point. Maybe he needs to go to a club where they actually use him in his right position, because yeah, right now there's so much. They're trying so hard to getting Guirassy back going, and we've been talking about how they need a new center forward. They have a perfectly good center forward, maybe, and maybe it's Adeyemi, and he just needs to be used better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he does kind of unfortunately strike me as the kind of player who maybe does have to move on, maybe move to the Premier League, play for like a West Ham or something like
Mm.
that. And I mean, you could also make a pretty strong argument that so much of his game is built around running into space, and Dortmund obviously don't play a lot of games when they have a lot of space, you know. Um, so maybe he would be actually be suited playing for a team in a league where he does more counter attacking. And he just doesn't really have that at Dortmund to an extent. So
Mm.
I don't know. It's a tricky one. It very much feels like a kind of square peg in a round hole here in terms of his spot in that Dortmund team. But it's just more noise, Manu, isn't it? You know, I was just thinking there in terms of like at the start of the season, we had the whole Felix Mecha stuff with the kind of what happened with him in social media. And then at the start of the season, we had
Mm.
Joe Bellingham's dad kicking up a fuss in the changing rooms. I'm sure there's other ones that don't come to mind, but have completely slipped my mind. But there's obviously a huge bit of media interest around Dortmund. They have a lot of media presence, and you know, maybe not to the same extent as Bayern, but when things aren't going well, people very quickly begin to pick up on that, and you know, start writing these kind of pieces trying to explain maybe what's going on behind closed doors. And it's all well and good for Dortmund to come out and show a brave face and say, you know, everyone's fine here, we're a big happy family, but
Mm.
that doesn't really come across well when the player comes off the pitch and tries to storm down when they're winning as well. That's the thing; they were winning at that point. It's not, you know, and
Yeah. And then the guy that came on scored
yeah,
the
well,
second goal.
exactly, you know, and but I think the Gladbach game is maybe a good example of maybe you know the problem they have with Adeyemi. Adeyemi was actually all over the place in that game. He was running around, he's chasing players down. He almost scored a goal when he kind of closed down the Gladbach defender so quickly. So maybe he would be thinking,
Mm.
I'm doing my role, I'm putting a shift in, but tactically speaking, he maybe isn't doing what Kovac needs him to do. And I think there's actually something interesting where he has that chance. I think it's in the first half where Guirassy kind of lays it off to him. And if you do watch the highlight, after he hits the shot and misses it, Guirassy's in the middle of like tumbling over. He gets up, realizes that Adeyemi didn't score the goal, and he screams at him. He absolutely screams at him.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually quite an interesting little moment where it's like there's so much tension, there's so much pressure on these guys to kind of get back into form and score goals, that they are kind of letting loose out on each other on the pitch. And you know, when they come off it, they're not happy.
No. Yeah, it's an interesting one. And you put that in contrast, we are going to talk about that um, as well with the two teams that are chasing Borussia Dortmund, RB Leipzig and Leverkusen facing each other in the Topspiel on Saturday, right? The 6:30 German time kickoff. And Leverkusen win that game 3-1. And of course, that's a disappointing result if you're RB Leipzig. But you still sense that both of these clubs, Leverkusen obviously because they won, but even Leipzig, they probably, it feels like they're more content with where they are following the significant rebuild this summer than Dortmund. You know, you would look at the table, you say, well, Leipzig and Leverkusen must be way ahead of Borussia Dortmund considering where they are. And I think that's really interesting. And I mean, Leverkusen, of course, it's a huge win for them. You know, a win that could have also ended in a 2-2 draw. Jan Kalbrev scoring in the 97th minute to make it 3-1 and make this result a lot more decisive than I think it was. Terrier and Schick. I mean, Terrier apparently only scores bangers for Leverkusen. I think that's what he was brought in. He scores an incredible goal last week. He scored an unbelievable header, to such an extent that you first thought it was actually Patrick Schick who scored it, because it was such a typical number 9 goal. And yeah, he's looking great after a horrific injury that, we all know can be a career ender. And so, he's looked great the last few games, and Leverkusen look like a team that, if they maybe don't make the wrong coaching decision at the very start of the season, probably be a lot closer to Bayern Munich at the moment, right? They really did gamble away their first 3 games of the season, and Hjulmund has done amazing work. They're firmly embedded in that top 4 now. They look like they're going to probably stay there for the rest of the year. And this result just, against a direct competitor for the top 4, is really quite something. And I also think, they've done such a great job in integrating all these very young players. Yes, Hoffmann features, Terrier features. These are more established players, but Bade looked better, Belosian looked better. These are younger guys. Tillman had his moments, and then off the bench, Christian Kofan comes on. Kulbrev, 18-year-old player who they signed from Kaiserslautern's youth academy. It's looking really good for Leverkusen at the moment, Stefan, and I know you're writing your newsletter on them this week, but just diving into them a little bit, they have really turned around a season that started to look going off the rails a little bit.
Without doubt, just quickly, by the way, before jumping to Leverkusen specifically, let me just rhyme off how many players were missing for both teams in this game, right? Bakayoko, Banzuzi, Diomande, Haidara, Henriks, Campbell, Nusa, Oedraogo, Bensagir, Matza, Palacios, Poku, Tapsoba, and Kwanzaa. That's like what? How many? Quickly, 15 or 14 first team players, starters.
That's a top 4 Bundesliga team right there.
And I think this game really showed the difference between these two sides and Dortmund. And I know people who maybe only have a passing interest in the Bundesliga, maybe just listening to this, or indeed Dortmund fans who think we're talking nonsense, wouldn't really understand this point. But I think this game showed that both these teams have something that Dortmund don't have, and that is a really impressive array of strength and depth. Obviously Leverkusen came out winners on the day. Another big game that they've won after that game against Dortmund in the Pokal. I know they obviously then lost the Bundesliga one, but you could think you could probably argue the Pokal one was maybe more important at that moment in time. But I thought it was a really good game. I thought Leipzig started better. They obviously didn't get their goal, for a beautiful goal from Schlager. Really is probably one of the best goals he's scored in his career, I'd say, maybe. I know he scored some screamers in his past, but that was one of the most well taken, finessed shots I think I've seen him score in a long time. He was admittedly a very underrated player in my opinion, Schlager, especially for Leipzig.
Yeah.
But then Leverkusen just kind of turned it around, and as you said, Terre scores a very Patrick Schick style header. I thought probably one of the best headers of the season I've seen so far. Wonderful goal. Schick then scores a perfect number 9 goal. And then, as you said, Kulbrev then comes on and scores a great goal himself. After Leverkusen probably could have scored maybe another couple of goals in the second half themselves. And yeah, I came away from that game really impressed with Leverkusen. Not just because they beat Leipzig in Leipzig, but because they've done so despite missing a number of players. Now, yes, okay, maybe Leipzig were technically missing more players, but I think for Leverkusen to go out there with, Andrik at centre half, Bellequan alongside him, not a starter, Tella on the left, attacking midfielders of Terrier and Hoffmann, and I know Terrier has obviously played, but I'm not quite sure I'd say he's the first team starter when everyone's fit. And I thought Leverkusen just responded tremendously well and just showed a degree of kind of tenacity and spirit that really underpins how well Hjulmand has done since he came in there. Since he replaced Erik ten Hag, only Bayern Munich have picked up more points in the Bundesliga than Leverkusen, and I know they finished this year a few points off Dortmund. I would probably say they are neck and neck with Dortmund for being the second best team in the Bundesliga. Leipzig are obviously in there as well, without a doubt. But I think one thing that Leverkusen maybe have over Dortmund, and maybe this is something that Leipzig also have, and we'll see in the second half of the season, is they've got far more strength and depth. They've got far more interesting young players coming through that team, who are only going to get better. You know, if someone like Tillman's only just kind of really hit the ground running, or sorry, only just kind of hit the ground and got going, if you will. That whole back line's still trying to come to lines of itself. I thought Arthur on the right hand side looked really good. And you know, there's just more and more kind of young players coming through with every kind of passing week. So where Dortmund, I think, are maybe a little stuck in the mud and relying on these kind of older players or players that they've been kind of, you know, struggling to get the best out of for a while now. At Leverkusen and Leipzig have this whole new roster of exciting young players. We were talking about it when the game was on. It's like watching some football manager like dream sequence where it's just like two teams full of exciting young players. And you know, you can joke about that and say, well, does that hold you back? But I think Leverkusen now that we're at the end of the year, Manu, and now we've had some time to kind of absorb what happened in the summer and see how well these players are kind of clicking, and the fact that Leverkusen acted very quickly to replace Ten Hag when they realised he wasn't the guy to kind of, you know, look over these guys. I think we can kind of look back and see Leverkusen play the blinder in summer because they obviously had to sell Wirtz, they obviously had to sell Frimpong. They didn't have to sell Granit Xhaka, but they eventually were more or less forced into it and had to let him go with a few other players as well. And it looked like they were kind of rolling the dice in the summer and just kind of picking up who they could get, where they can get them. And obviously, after a few weeks in Ten Hag, it looked like it was going to be an absolute disaster. But here we are in December. They're a few points off second place. In my opinion, probably the second best team in the Bundesliga right now. As I note in my newsletter, according to Opta and their expected points table, they're actually ahead of Dortmund in second place. And they now go into 2026 on really, really solid footing. You know, the interviews with the players after the game, I thought Patrick Schick, Hillman, they're all full of praise for each other, saying, oh, you know, it's not me, it's the players, or it's not the players, it's the head coach. Oh, it's he's doing a great job. No, he's doing a great job. And, you know, everyone's just very complimentary, very happy and just content with the way that things are going at Leverkusen. And, you know, you could really, really see them kind of seriously challenging Dortmund for that second place. If not, I'd be very surprised surpassing them, to be honest, unless something dramatic was to happen in January and Dortmund were to seriously improve on them. But yeah, and obviously the same goes for Leipzig as well to an extent. You know, they lost this game, which is maybe a concern for them. But for the most part, they've looked much, much better, obviously, haven't they? And I'm sure maybe Ole Werner would turn around and say, "Look, we were just missing too many players." I mean, Timo Werner came on. That shows how much they were struggling. Yeah. But no, yeah, very encouraging into the year for Leverkusen and Leipzig, I would say.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you may be worried about if you are Leverkusen is the AFCON, right? Because there are quite a lot of players playing the African Championships, and there's a decision now made that the AFCON is going to be only every 4 years, which I applaud. You know, the Euros are only every 4 years. I get the reasons why it's in January. You know, it's much easier to play it in most parts in Africa, and that, you know, it is their continental championship, and people are saying, oh, like, you know, this shouldn't be happening at this time or whatever. You know, they have good reasons and tradition to do this, and we shouldn't be really looking down on it. And it is, you know, for players that come from these African countries, it is a really, really important continental championship, and I think it's great that they're getting to play it. For clubs like Leverkusen, of course, it's a balancing act, right? Kofane, for example, didn't start in this game because they agreed with Cameroon that he would come off the bench and only play token minutes, and he had a few chances to finish the game. But you know, he essentially played a few minutes and then jumped on a plane to Africa to play the tournament in Morocco, right? So, you know, it's a really difficult balancing act. And of course, you know, Bayer Leverkusen scout really well in Africa. They're signing players there specifically. They're always very good as a club to be ahead of trends. Remember, they're one of the first teams in Germany, in Europe, in fact, to sign players from Brazil. And now they really, have a lot of focus on Africa, and this it has worked really well for their squad building. But, this is one of the drawbacks. So that's the thing that I worry about. Leipzig have a little bit of a similar issue because they have a lot of talents from that part of the world too. Although most of their, I think, African players represent France for now, so might hurt them a little bit less. But I think what's really impressed me about Leipzig is their depth. Someone like Gomes, right, who they signed last January, TDM Gomes. I think he's looking like a real hot prospect. Like a player that can become a really big star in the Bundesliga. Still very raw, but has quite a bit of something. Konrad Harder, remember him when they signed him, and we thought like, hey, actually that's a big deal, and he's looking better and better every single game. I think when I look at the team at the moment, and I think Haidara is someone that they're going to lose this winter. I think there's been stories about him going somewhere else. If I was them and I would do something at the moment, that midfield with Schlager, Baumgartner, and Seiwald is very solid, but it lacks a little bit of creativity. I know this is essentially the core of the Austrian national team there, but if I was someone, Ultra Ogo, when he was playing in there, he added quite a lot of creativity and that little bit extra that could combine, that could really link up the defense and midfield quite well. But without him, they've been lacking that little bit of creativity there. And so if I was Leipzig, that is something that I would maybe address in the winter.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're definitely not a kind of finished article, and I think we've talked about how they kind of pleasantly, came about and did pretty well in terms. Well, I mean, I suppose they had a difficult start against Bayern, but they kind of pleasantly surprised us, didn't they, in terms of how they came about after that defeat to Bayern and kind of really rose to prominence. But if you kind of look through their performances in terms of in the Bundesliga this season, and that's kind of all we can kind of judge them on because they're not playing in the Champions League at all. They lost heavily to Bayern.
Yeah.
They drew 1-1 with Dortmund, which, okay, fair enough. And they've now lost 3-1 to Leverkusen. And it'll be really interesting to see how they come back after that defeat to Leverkusen, but also how they come back in terms of January. As you said, they might go into transfer market and they might even bring in more players. But from watching that game, Ole Werner looked absolutely apoplectic, to use a word. He looked furious at the way that they lost that game, and I do kind of wonder if he'll kind of go away over the winter and kind of review the season that they've had and say, okay, we've done the basics very well, but there is something we're kind of missing in these big games. And again, I can only stress they were missing basically half their starting 11 for this game. So, that's understandable. And maybe sometimes you just have to kind of chalk these things up to that. But that's 3 of the top 4 they've played. If you want to consider themselves top 4, they've only taken 1 point off them. So, yes, they're doing very well. But if you kind of extrapolate that out for the rest of the season, it could make a strong argument that it would mean that if they keep kind of dropping points in these kind of big games, it could mean that maybe they finish 4th. And that win over Frankfurt recently suggests that they are certainly better than the teams around them, or just below them, sorry. But, they've got Bayern in the Pokal in February, and then they have to kind of bounce back very quickly. They play Bayern again, obviously, at the end of January as well. So I think if I was Ole Werner, I'd be probably looking at that squad and thinking, right, it's a very young team, it's very inexperienced, take that all under your wing and understand that, but maybe we have to work a little bit better on how we deal with these kind of big games and deal in these big games, because Leipzig score, they started really well in this game against Leverkusen, they deserved that goal to go ahead, then something happens, Leverkusen turn it on, Leverkusen show a degree of maybe maturity or a degree of grit to turn the game back in their favour, and Leipzig just kind of wither after that. And I think that's probably that's probably what really pissed Ole Werner off more than anything else. And again, that could just be down to inexperience. That could be down to the fact that they'll rely a lot on kind of younger players. But you're right; it's something they might have to address in January, or tactically speaking, or changing formation and players and stuff like that. But I think that's probably the one thing that Leipzig have to kind of walk away from the first half of the season and maybe consider.
Yeah, and find a home for Timo Werner, which I did some digging on this. Is going to be extremely difficult. There's maybe one that we can address in one of our first transfer shows if he's still around by then. But I think that he's getting minutes to basically show the world that he still exists. He's on a big salary. Leipzig would like to offload that salary, and I know that he's been linked to MLS teams and New York Red Bulls. He didn't want that. Inter Miami didn't want him. There's now rumors to San Jose Earthquakes, and I understand that that's been sort of been muted by everyone involved. But maybe finding a home for Timo Werner and getting rid of his salary gives them the flexibility to do something else, Stefan. I think is sort of what they're hoping for.
RB Leipzig trying to find a home for Timo Werner kind of sums up a good 70% of Timo Werner's career. At least that's how it feels. So
it's unfortunate, isn't it? Like, he's such a promising player at one point. It can really show you how a career can just go from one day to another, just go off.
Yeah, I mean, without really digging it all up and getting into it, he actually reminds me a lot of Adeyemi in the sense that a very, very gifted individual, very gifted athlete who's very good at very specific things. And if you kind of get him in that kind of tunnel vision mode of doing that single thing very well, he's a very good player. But because he's fast, because he can run with the ball, he often gets shoved out wide, and that's when he becomes pretty ineffective. And I don't really know why Leipzig re-signed him, to be honest with you, but he's a bit of a kind of albatross around their neck at this moment in time, isn't he?
If we should, one of my favorite sports podcasts out there, they sometimes do like a deep dive into players and why things have worked out or not worked out. They do both examples, and maybe that's something that we need to do every once in a while as a bonus show. Just do a deep dive, and Timo Werner would be a really good starting point. Like, where did it all go wrong for Timo Werner? Could be a good podcast. Something to think about.
Yeah, there's a kind of weird thing with Timo Werner, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I'm trying to just quickly Google it there. Like, he's kind of got this really weird reputation in the UK because he gave like really silly kind of interviews, and are almost kind of like Thomas Muller-esque style, except he meant it. And like, there was like one question, like I can't remember what the one story was, like what's your favorite food? And he said like pasta with ketchup. I think that's what it was, and it just kind of went viral.
Yes. Well, and then obviously Dan always jokes about this, the Döner, his preference for Döner, right? There's this famous Döner shop in Leipzig that is like full of photos of Timo Werner.
He doesn't understand the idea of having like scrambled eggs with ketchup and things like that. But he's a very kind of deadpanned, very kind of straightforward guy. I'll put it that way. And that maybe comes across in the pitch as well sometimes. Yeah. But I feel like we're getting a little distracted here.
I think my final thought before we move on to Bayern Munich is I wouldn't write him off completely yet. We wrote off Mario Götze, who then went to the Netherlands for 2 years and came back and still played a really important role. Yeah. And is still playing a very important role for Eintracht Frankfurt. So don't write him off completely yet, I would say. I think it's just time for.
Do you want to know the best? Sorry to interrupt you there, Manu. Do you want to know the best bit of trivia about Timo Werner? He and I share a birthday, both born on March 6th. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, so there's a chance, you say.
That changes everything.
All right, let's move on to the Bayern game. Not much to write home about. I said this in our Substack chat. I felt for Heidenheim because I thought they looked really good in this game, but they just don't have the quality to compete in the Bundesliga right now. That is the unfortunate reality that they face. I think they actually played really well. They did everything right. They're just not good enough. And that's just the reality. And for Bayern Munich, they're not a team that stumbles at the moment when they are faced with adversity like they did last year. Kompany has been playing incredible good football, and he can now mix and match players. And there's an Ito playing on the left, there's Stanisic playing on the right, Guerrero playing in midfield, Goretzka. As long as you have that front line with Louis Diaz, Karl, Ulisi, and Kane up, everything is good in the world. And we're getting to the point now in the season. And there was so much talk about this last year, and I kind of really wanted to focus a little bit on this show, because there was this long theme, especially in our Substack chat, that Kompany, when is he playing the kids? When is he playing the kids? When is he playing the kids? Well, guys, I think you need to find a different topic because he's playing the kids. Because Leonard Karl is now fully established superstar at Bayern Munich at 17, right? Vista Mike got minutes in this game. David Daiber, an 18-year-old midfielder who represents Portugal at the youth level but was born and raised in Munich, got minutes in this game. He comes on for Rafael Guerrero, right? And then Casiano Chiala, a 16-year-old centre-back, second youngest Bayern player in Bundesliga history, makes his debut. Perfect timing because we do this talents calendar thing on Transfermarkt every Christmas period, right? And he was actually the talent that we featured on December 22nd, so today. And so there's a feature on him on Transfermarkt with quotes from Markus Weinziel, his youth coach, who spoke in great length about him. It means also I know a little bit about him. He is a talent with massive upside, and you know what? I think Kompany, and I mentioned this on one of the bonus shows, he is actually more than willing to play players from the academy, especially if they still have an empty hard drive and he can form them. And I think we now, with Bayern Munich being more comfortable in the Bundesliga, I think we're going to the stage now where the kids are coming, Stefan.
Yeah, and as you know, as our subscribers have alluded to, doesn't come a moment too soon. It's an interesting kind of development that we've seen at Bayern. I think you could cynically say, well, Bayern are playing the kids because they've already won the Bundesliga, no one's put up a challenge. I don't think that's really the case. I think they're doing it because these guys deserve to play. I think Leonard Karl's been a revelation since he came into the team. Even in this game, he was kind of almost calling the shots at times, even though those guys like Diaz and Olise on the pitch. Bayern obviously missing a huge number of players, either through injury. I'm not sure if they have. Oh no, Jackson's obviously an international duty. That's the one that stands out. But Bischoff was out, Sasha Boya was out, Kim Min-jae out, Kimmich out, Leimer out. Leimer had yellow card. Musiala still not back. Neuer still out. Pavlovic out. So huge number of players missing. It's perhaps a little fortunate that this game fell on the match against Heidenheim, that they were able to kind of bring in a kind of second roster, the B team, and they did perfectly well. And yeah, it's great. These kids are obviously doing well, and things are going really well for Bayern. And it seems like every time they bring one of these kids in, they do really, really well. I've kind of ran out of superlatives for Leonard Karl. I think he's not just in terms of like a technical player, in terms of how good he is, he's also just shown a maturity to want the ball, which either comes to him naturally or is something he's learned from Musiala, because, as I've said it to, and I keep drawing the comparisons to him, and hopefully it's justified in the long run, but the way that he's came into this Bayern team and demands the ball and demands to be the guy who sets up the plays, reminds me so much of Musiala. He doesn't shirk away from responsibility, and it's a testament to that squad that he obviously feels comfortable enough to do those things. I do think it's also interesting that, if you kind of want to couple this with Bayern's transfer policy over the recent years, which has very much become this idea of, we're just going to sign the best players in their peak years. And if that means we have to pay through the nose for a Premier League player, then so be it. And Harry Kane's a perfect example of that. Diaz is another one. I know they got Olise for relatively cheap, but it's still a player they paid 50 million euros for from Crystal Palace. This is all kind of money that would have Karl-Heinz Rummenigge reaching for the whiskey bottle, once upon a time. And as a result, they've actually, I was just checking this actually as we started the segment, they've got the second oldest starting 11 average age in the Bundesliga this year. And that's obviously considering some of the young players they brought in. But you look at the guys who are stepping in to help out here. Goretzka, no spring chicken. Guerrero, no spring chicken. Serge Gnabry, no spring chicken. These are all kind of guys who are in late 20s, if not early 30s. Jonathan Tah, another good example. He's a player that they signed in the summer from Leverkusen, who is by no means a young player. Not an old player either, but not a young one either. So they have to fill the gaps here in that squad, not only from a financial point of view, because they can't go out and sign a whole bench of players like Diaz or Olise or Kane, but also from a kind of sporting point of view. They need to have those youthful legs in amongst your Kanes, your Goretzkas, guys like that, Urbig's another perfect example coming in from Manuel Neuer, who, we've talked about. Still been a very, very good player, but is definitely pushing the limits of the human body, I think it's fair to say, in terms of what an athlete can do at the top of the game at 40. So I think Bayern have been really smart about the way that they've I don't want to say filled in the cracks, because that would suggest there's issues. I don't think that's the right word, but filled in the gaps, maybe, if you will, with this kind of layer of youthful players. And it's a testament to the campus at Bayern, which is a very impressive place, that these guys are able to come in and step up. And it's a testament to Vincent Kompany that he's able to put kind of trust in these guys, for sure. And it's working out really, really well. And hopefully, Manu, this might be an interesting kind of new... We might be seeing a new kind of approach to squad building at Bayern before our very eyes here, because, there was so much talk before Kompany came in about how Bayern are going to approach the transfer market, because, we had that whole policy under Oliver Kahn and Salihamidzic that didn't work out. Huge amount of criticism around, Max Abel and his companions at Bayern right now over whether they were doing the right thing with the players we were signing, the players letting go, etc. And we've kind of seen this team come together and form a very natural bond of older, established, world-class players and young players who could go on to become world-class players. And to give Bayern some credit and to maybe give them benefit of doubt, at this point, it's beginning to look like it's all been part of a long-term plan. And if that's the case, then credit to them, because it seems like the perfect blend of talent and youth.
Yeah. Is
this where you cynically tell me that they've just been lucky?
No, I'm. This is where I'm cynically telling you that there was a lot of people wrong at Bayern Munich, and one old man at the Tegernsee, who we laughed at, very right. Uli Hoeneß has been preaching this transfer policy for a long time. And it's because that's what he was doing in the 90s and the early 2000s when he was in charge of player transfers. This Bayern team was always this was always a club that relied heavily on youth players, and they would only sign the stars to supplement that team, right? You look at the golden generation of Schweinsteiger and Philipp Lahm and Thomas Müller, and that team was supplemented by the likes of Arjen Robben and Frank Ribéry. And Uli Hoeneß, finally put his foot down this summer and said no more player names. The board had to, basically at the end of the day, the only player that arrived was Nicholas Jackson on loan, because Uli Hoeneß said this is enough. We can't spend. We can sign one marquee player a year or two max, but we can't do it every year. Because we have to earn our own money. This is what he's been preaching. He's not always very good at delivering the message. I can agree with everyone there, but I think he might have been right here. And he said this over and over again. We have to rely more on our academy players. We're spending 70 million euros on our campus. We need to bring these players through the campus and need to bring them up. And I hate to say this, but old man Oli was right. We're seeing it right in front of our eyes. The academy is developing young players, and the only way for them to get into the first team is by playing. Lennart Karl is playing for Bayern Munich because Florian Wirtz didn't arrive this summer, and because Thomas Müller was moved on, right? A young guy like Kiala is now playing for Bayern Munich because they didn't sign an additional centre back, right? You look at like Mr. Mike, who's going to get increasingly big minutes in this team. He's going to get more minutes because Kingsley Coman was sold, and then Uli Hoeneß said no replacements.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would now say, cynically, I don't think that was the plan. by the majority of the Bayern Munich board, but it was one that they had to execute because there was one man who was very powerful and said, this is how we have to do it. And Uli Hoeneß was right. And we're seeing it right in front of our eyes that he was. And I think he played a really big role in signing Vincent Kompany, a coach who was on board with it. And so that's why it's working. So the cynic in me would say, there was a plan here, but I don't think everyone agreed to it.
And it also kind of sets Bayern up really well in the transfer window, because if you look at the players who are out of contract in 2026 or in 2027, my head, if I'm not mistaken, Upamecano's obviously out of contract at the end of the year, and they've just brought this new central defender through. It comes in, as you mentioned, who could be a starter for them next season. Goretzka's out of contract as well. I'm not sure if he's in the contract this summer or next summer, but obviously they'll have to make a decision on him one way or another in the summer. They got Tom Bischoff waiting in the wings. He's been playing left back, but he's ready to kind of step in there as well. Not that Goretzka starts every week, of course, and they've also got Pavlovic as well. And the other one's Serge Gnabry as well. And guys like Wisdom Mike, whoever, or Leonard Carl. They've already got replacements for a lot of those guys already in place. That's like the best part of 60 million euros in wages every year, Manu. Between those three players, and all of a sudden you've got replacement for them without spending a penny. That's the power of youth academy. That's the power of having a good youth academy and developing these players properly. So if they all work out, and hopefully they do, then that makes Bayern squad planning over the next kind of 12 or 18 months a lot easier.
So what's coming up right now, there's more. There was another kid on the bench who didn't play, Felipe Chavez. We actually featured him in our talents calendar last year. Who's from the academy, very good player, fantastic player, in fact. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The campus is sitting on a gold mine at the moment. And it's coming at the perfect time, right? And it's not just benefiting Bayern Munich, it's benefiting everyone. The German national team has always been at its best when Bayern Munich had 5-6 guys that they developed in their own academy, right? Because that builds the core, and then you can supplement it. And so this is an exciting time if you're a Bayern Munich fan. There were 4 academy players on the pitch at one point in this game.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very impressive.
Yeah, it's very impressive, and it puts Bayern in good steps. So we need to see. Yeah, when you see how much game time they get in the second half of the season.
Actually, sorry, it was 5, because I forgot Stanisic. It was 5 academy players at one point. So even more impressive. That's half your squad. Yeah. That's half your team. Right? Anyways, I think it's a great thing. And also, this is maybe a good reminder before we wrap this up, Stefan, because we're way over an hour. This is Mad Ford territory we're in. I just want to say too, if you have questions on this, and there's a few good ones coming in, because I'm doing my last newsletter of this year is going to be a Bayern Munich Christmas Q&A, where you can send a question in. That chat is open, and I actually open it up for everyone to ask questions. So if you have a question and you're not a regular subscriber, you can find it on the Substack and send me a question there as well. On the squad building or whatever else you have in mind, and I happily try to answer it, because sometimes there's not enough time on a podcast. But just if you have additional thoughts on Bayern Munich that you want to have answered, there's a good space for it. But Stefan, I think that does it
for this, and does it for this year, I think.
Yes, probably for this year, 90% sure. I know it does it before Christmas. So I am definitely going to say Merry Christmas, Frohes Fest, or whatever else you're celebrating during this holiday season. Enjoy the days off, and Stefan, to you as well.
For sure.
Merry
Christmas. If we do a bonus show, if we do another show before the year, it will be a bonus show for paid subscribers. So if you're interested, do obviously check out you can check us out on Substack, or you can become a member of the YouTube channel, and you get the bonus shows on that as well. But yeah, obviously a big thank you as well, man, for everyone who listens to the show. It's not just the paid people, it's people who just listen to the show week in, week out. That's kind of our bread and butter, if you will. And we're always really, really grateful to the people who listen, follow, and all that stuff. It's been a big year in German football. Hopefully 2026 will be just as interesting. And we always appreciate the support.
Yeah, it's fifth star is coming home, Stefan. 2026, you'll see.
For gegenpressing.
I didn't specify for whom. All right. Well, let's wrap up 2025, and yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and talk to you all guys soon. Auf Wiedersehen.